Did you know that in 2026, millions of British homeowners could be forced to sell the very houses they thought was safe forever? From sudden tax hikes to strict new green rules, the laws on the horizon are not just minor adjustments. They are game changers. Families, landlords, and even retirees who spent decades building security may wake up to find their homes turning into financial traps. The question is no longer if these changes will come, but who will be hit the hardest. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear could redefine home ownership in Britain. Number 10. National insurance and pension contribution tie-ins. In 2026, the government is expected to introduce a controversial policy linking property wealth to pension and national insurance contributions. The idea is to reduce the financial strain on the state by requiring homeowners with significant housing equity to contribute more toward their retirement costs. For many older homeowners, this could mean smaller pension benefits if they own a property deemed too valuable, or additional national insurance-style payments tied directly to their housing assets. While designed to balance public finances, the reform will place extraordinary pressure on seniors who rely on both their pensions and the security of their homes. For some, downsizing or selling entirely may become the only viable way to access fair retirement income. The consequences will be especially stark for retirees who purchased modest homes decades ago that have since ballooned in value. A couple who bought a suburban house for £70,000 in the 1980s might now own a property worth £500,000, yet their income remains fixed. Under the new tie-in, their home places them in a higher contribution category, even though their cash flow has not changed. Pension reductions or extra charges could make staying in that property financially impossible. Younger households will not escape the impact either, as higher contributions linked to property equity could erode their savings potential, creating generational tension. Families may feel punished simply for owning a home in an area where prices have soared, regardless of their actual income levels. Supporters argue the reform ensures fairness by redistributing benefits away from those sitting on large amounts of housing wealth. Critics, however, call it a penalty on success and stability, undermining the very principle of saving for the future. Regions like the South East, Bristol, and Greater London, where housing values have grown fastest, are likely to be hardest hit. Seniors may be pushed into selling family homes, not because they want to, but because keeping them reduces their retirement security. For many, this law transforms a home from a legacy to a liability, forcing tough choices between holding on to property and maintaining a dignified standard of living in old age. Number 9. Foreign ownership restrictions. In 2026, the UK is preparing to introduce new restrictions on foreign ownership of residential properties, a move aimed at cooling overheated markets in cities like London, Edinburgh, and coastal hotspots. These restrictions will come in the form of heavy new taxes on overseas buyers, stricter disclosure rules about the source of funds, and in some cases, outright bans on non-residents purchasing certain types of homes. Policymakers argue that foreign investment has driven up property prices beyond the reach of ordinary citizens, leaving locals competing with global wealth for housing. While the intent is to level the playing field, the consequences for foreign owners already in the market could be dramatic. Many may decide or be forced to sell their holdings as the financial and regulatory hurdles grow too steep. The impact will be especially visible in areas where international buyers have historically dominated. Luxury flats in London's Canary Wharf, Georgian terraces in Edinburgh, and scenic cottages along the Cornish coast have long attracted global investors. With the new restrictions, these properties may no longer be as desirable or feasible to hold. For some owners, the additional taxes will erode profitability to the point that maintaining the property no longer makes financial sense. For others, legal limitations may block them from renewing or expanding their portfolios. The result could be a surge of international sell-offs, bringing more properties onto the domestic market, but also creating short-term instability in pricing. Critics of the law caution that the sudden retreat of foreign capital may have unintended ripple effects. Developers, who often rely on international demand to finance new housing projects, could scale back construction, reducing the long-term supply of homes. Local economies in tourist-driven areas may also suffer if foreign buyers withdraw entirely. Still, for many communities, the change will be welcomed as a chance to reclaim housing for local residents. The core reality remains. Foreign ownership restrictions will push many international investors to exit the market, and the properties they leave behind will reshape both the availability and affordability of housing across the UK. For existing owners, selling may not be a matter of choice, but of survival under new rules. Number 8. Mortgage interest deduction removal. In 2026, one of the most significant financial changes for landlords will be the complete removal of mortgage interest deductions. For years, landlords were able to offset some of their mortgage costs against rental income, softening the impact of borrowing expenses. Although partial reductions have already been phased in, the upcoming reform will eliminate this relief entirely. That means landlords will be taxed on gross rental income rather than net profit, even if their mortgage payments consume a large share of earnings. For heavily mortgaged landlords, this could turn once profitable properties into financial losses overnight. With no tax buffer to absorb rising interest rates, selling may become the only way to escape mounting costs. The effect will be particularly severe in regions where property values are high and rental yields are relatively low. A landlord with a £400,000 mortgage on a London flat, for instance, might find that rental income barely covers monthly repayments. Once the deduction is gone, the landlord faces a tax bill calculated on income they do not truly have, leaving them with negative cash flow. Small-scale landlords, who make up a large portion of the UK's rental market, are the most vulnerable. Without the economies of scale enjoyed by large corporate investors, they will struggle to stay afloat. Many will choose to liquidate their holdings, shifting homes from the rental sector into the sales market. Supporters argue that the reform will create a fairer tax system, preventing landlords from gaining advantages unavailable to ordinary homeowners. Yet critics warn it will accelerate the decline of the private rental sector, reducing available housing for tenants and worsening shortages. Tenants may face greater instability as landlords exit the market, while first-time buyers may see more opportunities as properties are sold. Still, the transition will come at a steep cost for those who invested in rental housing as a way to secure retirement or long-term financial stability. By removing this final piece of tax relief, the law ensures that landlords carrying significant debt face an ultimatum: absorb ongoing losses or sell. For many, the choice will be brutally simple. Number 7. New rent control legislation. In 2026, sweeping rent control measures are expected to reshape the private rental sector in the UK. These laws will cap the amount landlords can charge tenants, with annual increases tied strictly to inflation, or set percentages determined by regional authorities. While the goal is to protect tenants from soaring rental costs, the knock-on effect will be profound for landlords. Properties that once provided healthy income streams may suddenly become unprofitable, particularly in high-demand cities where market rents far exceed capped limits. Owners relying on rental income to cover mortgages, maintenance, or retirement plans could find themselves trapped with properties that no longer generate enough revenue, leaving selling as their only practical option. The pressure on landlords will be compounded by the rising costs of compliance. Alongside caps, the legislation will strengthen tenant rights, making eviction processes more complex and lengthier. For smaller landlords managing just one or two properties, this shift could prove overwhelming. Imagine a landlord in Manchester who has used rent to supplement pension income when rents are frozen, but maintenance expenses climb. The investment quickly becomes unsustainable. For portfolio landlords, reduced profitability across multiple properties may force them to downsize or exit the market entirely. As a result, thousands of rental homes could be listed for sale, dramatically changing the composition of local housing market. Critics warn that rent controls may worsen the very problems they aim to solve. While tenants will initially benefit from stable prices, the long-term effect could be a shrinking rental sector. As landlords reduced supply may ultimately lead to fewer choices for renters, pushing demand onto the remaining stock and creating hidden market pressure. Meanwhile, first-time buyers may seize the opportunity as more homes enter the sales market, but the sudden shift risks destabilizing communities reliant on rental housing. By attempting to bring fairness, the legislation may instead create a ripple effect of forced sales, transforming once secure rental homes into contested assets. For many landlords facing thinner margins and mounting regulations, selling will be less a decision of preference and more an unavoidable necessity. Number 6. Vacancy penalties. From 2026, homeowners who leave properties empty for extended periods will face heavy financial consequences under new vacancy penalty laws designed to combat the growing crisis of unused housing stock. This measure specifically targets properties left unoccupied for more than 6 months in a year. Local councils will be empowered to impose steep fines or multiply council tax rates on such homes, creating an ongoing cost burden that few owners will be able to absorb. The government argues that too many houses sit dark and locked, particularly in large cities, while thousands struggle to secure affordable accommodation. By hitting owners in their wallets, the new penalties are intended to bring dormant homes back into use, either through rental or sale. The financial impact of these vacancy penalties could be devastating for certain groups of owners. Individuals who inherit a property but cannot immediately move in, those who spend parts of the year abroad, and investors who treat houses as long-term assets will all find themselves caught by the new rules. Imagine a London flat left empty while the owner works overseas. Once the 6-month threshold passes, the property becomes a costly liability rather than a stable investment. For those without the funds to renovate or rent out their vacant homes quickly, the most logical response will be to put the property on the market. This change could unleash a wave of forced sales, particularly in prime areas, where investment-driven vacancies are common. Supporters claim that vacancy penalties will relieve pressure on the housing crisis by unlocking supply, but critics highlight unintended consequences. Retirees who divide their time between the UK and abroad, or families holding properties for children's future use, may face sudden financial hardship. Even homeowners dealing with prolonged renovations or legal disputes could be punished unfairly. The law assumes vacancy is always a matter of choice, yet in reality, many situations are far more complex. Nonetheless, the fines are expected to rise steeply the longer a property remains empty, leaving little room for negotiation. Ultimately, this policy risks forcing sales, not just from absentee investors, but also from ordinary households caught in difficult circumstances. Number 5. Second home surcharge. In 2026, a sharp rise in taxes on second homes is expected to shake the housing market, particularly in tourist regions and wealthy urban areas. This surcharge will target individuals who own more than one property, whether it is a holiday home in Cornwall, a pied-à-terre in London, or an investment flat in Edinburgh. The government's stated goal is to release more housing stock for local residents by discouraging people from keeping properties they do not regularly use. Yet for owners, the new costs could become overwhelming. Annual bills may double or even triple, leaving many unable to justify holding on to a second property. For those already managing mortgages, the extra burden will be a tipping point that drives them to sell. The reform is designed to address growing frustrations in areas where locals are priced out by wealthy buyers who purchase homes as investments or seasonal getaways. Communities in Devon, the Lake District, and parts of Wales have long complained about houses sitting empty for much of the year, while younger families cannot find affordable options. By imposing a higher surcharge, the government hopes to push second homeowners to either rent out their properties consistently or release them into the market. However, this policy creates new dilemmas. Owners who plan to keep a holiday home for retirement, or parents holding an extra flat for their children, may suddenly find their financial plans in ruins. Selling becomes not just a possibility, but often the most practical solution. Critics argue that the surcharge punishes ordinary people alongside wealthy investors. Middle-income households who saved for years to purchase a modest cottage or small flat could be hit just as hard as millionaires with luxury portfolios. At the same time, property markets in second home hotspots may experience sudden volatility. A wave of sales could push down prices temporarily, but it could also leave communities dependent on tourism struggling with fewer seasonal visitors. The intention is to restore balance to local housing. The reality is that thousands of owners will face untenable costs. For many, the emotional attachment to a second home will not be strong enough to outweigh the financial strain of keeping it under the new law. Number 4. Buy-to-let mortgage restrictions. In 2026, new financial rules are set to tighten the screws on the buy-to-let sector, reshaping how landlords can operate in the UK housing market. These reforms will introduce tougher affordability checks, higher deposit requirements, and stricter stress testing for anyone applying for or renewing a buy-to-let mortgage. The aim is to reduce speculation and cool the overheated rental market, but the outcome may force many small and medium landlords to rethink their position. For owners already carrying heavy debt, refinancing under the new conditions could become impossible. leaving them with no choice but to sell properties that no longer fit the stricter lending criteria. These restrictions arrive at a time when rental yields are already being squeezed by rising maintenance costs, new safety regulations, and shifting tenant protections. Landlords who previously relied on cheap borrowing to expand their portfolios may now see their margins evaporate. Imagine a landlord with 3 properties, each mortgaged under old, more lenient rules. When the loans come up for renewal, the bank may demand larger down payments or refuse the applications altogether if the rental income no longer passes affordability checks. Without access to credit, many will be forced into liquidation, flooding the market with homes that were once long-term investments. This shift could alter the balance of supply and demand, especially in urban centres where buy-to-let ownership dominates. The broader consequences will not stop with landlords. Tenants may experience greater instability as owners sell properties rather than navigate the tighter lending environment. Critics warn this could worsen housing insecurity, especially in cities like London, Birmingham, and Manchester where rental demand is highest. Proponents argue that limiting speculative investment will free up homes for first-time buyers, but the transition will likely be painful. Families who rely on the private rental market could face rising rents as supply falls, even while investors retreat. By making credit harder to access, the law may achieve its goal of slowing speculation, but at the cost of driving many landlords out of the sector entirely. For those unable to meet the stricter requirements, selling up may be the only option left. Number 3. Green Energy Retrofit Law. Beginning in 2026, homeowners across the UK may face strict requirements to bring their properties up to modern green energy standards. This law focuses on reducing carbon emissions from older housing stock, which accounts for a large share of the country's energy waste. Homeowners will be obligated to install upgrades such as advanced insulation, heat pumps, double or triple glazing, and in many cases, solar panels or other renewable technologies. While the environmental goal is clear, the financial reality is far harsher. For an average household, retrofitting costs could range from £15,000 to £40,000, depending on the size and age of the property. For those already struggling with everyday expenses, such upgrades may be completely unaffordable, leaving selling as their only realistic option. The law does not stop at demanding improvements. Homes that fail to meet the required standards could be penalised with steep fines, reduced eligibility for mortgages, or restrictions on being rented out or sold. A landlord with several properties might find it impossible to finance upgrades across an entire portfolio, leading to widespread liquidations in the rental market. Even owner-occupiers will feel the pressure, as properties without retrofits may lose value rapidly. Prospective buyers will be reluctant to purchase homes that require immediate costly renovations, effectively trapping current owners in a financial bind. Research indicates that nearly 60% of UK homes built before 1980 would need significant retrofitting, meaning millions of households are potentially affected. Supporters argue that the law will modernise Britain's ageing housing and help tackle climate change. Yet critics see it as another burden on ordinary people who have little control over soaring costs. From pensioners in old cottages, families in Victorian terraces, and residents of post-war flats all face the same demands, regardless of their ability to pay. While subsidies and grants may be offered, they are unlikely to cover the full scale of the expense. For many, the calculation becomes unavoidable. Either take on enormous debt to comply, or sell the property and escape the looming penalty. This legislation, intended to secure a greener future, may instead accelerate housing insecurity in the present. Number 2. Inheritance tax expansion. From 2026 onwards, changes to inheritance tax rules could shake the foundations of family wealth planning across Britain. Currently, there are thresholds that allow property owners to pass homes to their children without triggering excessive taxes. However, new legislation is expected to lower these thresholds significantly, meaning more families will be caught in the tax net. A home that once would have been exempt from inheritance tax may now face charges running into the tens or even hundreds of thousands of pounds. Families unprepared for this financial blow may have no option but to sell the property simply to cover the tax bill. For many, the idea of passing on a cherished family home will suddenly feel like an impossible dream. This shift is particularly devastating for middle-class households who worked for decades to secure a home. A modest house in London, Cambridge, or Oxford that cost under £100,000 in the 1980s is now worth over £500,000 or more. Under the new rules, such estates will be heavily taxed, even though the owners may not see themselves as wealthy. Children inheriting these homes will be hit hardest, forced to decide between taking on crushing debt to pay inheritance duties or putting the property on the market. Reports suggest thousands of family homes could be listed for sale shortly after the reforms take effect. What was once meant to be a safety net for future generations risks becoming a financial trap. Critics argue that inheritance tax expansion is less about fairness and more about revenue collection. While the government insists it is targeting the wealthy, the reality is far more complicated. Families in regions with booming property markets, like the southeast, Cornwall, or parts of Scotland, will feel the squeeze even if they live modestly. The policy sends a chilling message. Owning a valuable home is no longer an advantage when it comes to passing it down. Instead of protecting legacies, many families will face painful decisions that end with a for sale sign planted in front gardens. By reshaping what inheritance means, this law has the power to dismantle family stability and uproot generational security. Number 1. Property Tax Reform 2026. The year 2026 is expected to bring one of the most dramatic shifts in how property taxes are calculated in the UK. For decades, council tax bands have been based on outdated valuations from the early 1990s, meaning many homes no longer reflect their real market worth. With the new reform, properties will be reassessed according to their present-day value, capturing the massive surge in housing prices over the past decade. Families who once comfortably sat in mid-range tax brackets may now find themselves reclassified into much higher ones. The result is a sudden rise in yearly tax bills that could stretch household budgets to breaking point. For many, this change transforms their home from a source of stability into a financial burden. These reforms are not only about numbers on paper, they translate into tough, everyday choices for households across the country. A retired couple living in a suburban 3-bedroom home might suddenly discover that their annual tax bill doubles or even triples overnight. Parents already struggling with food prices, energy costs, and mortgage repayments will be asked to shoulder thousands of pounds more each year just to keep their property. Research shows that nearly a quarter of homeowners already spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs. With property tax hikes layered on top, some families will find themselves forced into an impossible decision: cut back on essentials or consider selling their home altogether. The government frames this reform as a step toward fairness, ensuring wealthier property owners contribute more to local services. Yet critics argue it will punish ordinary people living in modest homes that happen to sit in areas where values have soared. Cities like London, Bristol, and Manchester could be hit hardest, where average prices have skyrocketed. Rural towns, once considered affordable, are no longer safe either, as demand pushes values up. Homeowners who bought decades ago for a fraction of current prices may now face tax bills designed for million-pound estates. The harsh reality is that rising council tax will not discriminate between the wealthy elite and ordinary families. It will pressure anyone caught in these newly inflated brackets, pushing many closer to sell. The housing landscape in Britain is on the verge of a seismic shift, and 2026 could mark the year where owning a home no longer guarantees stability. Each of the laws we've explored, from property tax reforms to pension tie-ins, reveals a system that increasingly views housing not just as shelter, but as a tool for revenue and regulation. For ordinary families, landlords, and retirees, this shift will feel personal and immediate. Rising costs, shrinking benefits, and tighter controls mean that homes once seen as a source of comfort may soon become unbearable financial burdens. While policymakers frame these changes as necessary for fairness and sustainability, the reality is that thousands of households may find themselves with no alternative but to sell. The consequences will ripple far beyond individual families, reshaping communities, altering markets, and testing the very idea of security in home ownership. For millions, 2026 is not just another year of policy adjustments. It is the year that could force them to make one of the hardest choices of their lives: hold on and struggle, or let go of the place they call home.